Hello and welcome to my first masterclass video on WaveCloud. And the first thing we're going to learn today is exactly what is granular synthesis. So granular synthesis takes an audio file and splits it up into tiny fragments which we call grains. And these fragments are typically only a few milliseconds in length. But the magic really happens when we piece these grains back together and all of these grains slightly overlap. It's almost as if we can freeze time us at a specific point in the audio file. And to demonstrate that, I'm going to load this vocal here. Now WaveCloud is currently configured to deliver 10 particles per second, and each of those is 10k long, which is just under a quarter of a second. Now, as I run my finger across the timeline, we're hearing a reconstruction of the original audio wave out of grains that we've taken from that sample position. So it's a combination then of the number of grains we emit and the length of the grains that give us that continuity of sound. And if we step through the samples that make up every individual grain at different speeds, we can get different tones or notes. Now, to obtain a degree of smoothness between one grain and another, we can apply a amplitude shaping algorithm to that using this shape knob. And what that does, that shapes the grain to be either, as we see here, square in nature, to elliptical in nature, and then we can even do a kind of a sawtooth shape for a more brittle sound. Now WaveCloud ships with a number of test samples for you to have a play around with, and they can be accessed via this file drop down here. Now I'm going to go into the samples folder and I'm going to pick this sample here and I'm going to play it back to you.
So this way please. Thank you.
Now by tapping on the ruler at the appropriate place, I can isolate a particular word, in this case please. Now placing the cursor in this way assigns that current sample position to C3. But right now we've got multiple grains that are active, so if we reduce the number of grains down to 1, extend the length slightly and reduce the randomness so that it always starts at the cursor position, you can hear the effect of one single grain. So depending on the application, it's important to make sure we get these combination of options set correctly. Now the best way to learn how to use WaveCloud, in my opinion, is to build your own preset, and that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to go through the steps required to build your own preset. So the first thing you want to do is go up to the main menu and select Init Patch and say yes. And that really ensures that every single setting within the app is set to a default known setting, just in case you leave something set and you're wondering why you're not getting the sound you require. Now the first thing you need to do is load a WAV file, and we provide a few of these which are accessible via this file button at the top of the screen. But you can also drag and drop files directly from the inbuilt iPad Files app, as simple as this, and they're imported, converted to the right format and ready for you to use. Also, files imported this way are also added to what we call the audio pool, which is available when we tap on the file button at the top of the screen. Now the third method of importing files is to record either from the inbuilt microphone or your audio device, and we do that by pressing the record button here. You will then be presented with a dialog asking whether you want to record stereo or mono, and it will sit waiting for audio input. So as soon as it detects audio input, it will start recording. Now I'm going to sample a good few bars here, and then when I release my finger on my keyboard, it automatically stops when the sound dies away to a certain level. Once recorded, I can play back the audio sample by pressing the play button, which is located above the record. Now WaveCloud assumes that the imported sample is going to be assigned to C3, and if it's not, you need to tune that sample using the tune button. In my case, I recorded C3 on my keyboard, therefore I don't need to do any tuning. So let's try and make a preset out of this sample I've just recorded. Now the first thing you'll note is if you try and play a key on your keyboard, in this case C3, it will play back at the original pitch, but it doesn't sound good. And that's because the grains of sound have been produced at a static cursor position. So what we require is an easy way to add movement to that cursor position, and the easiest way to do that is to add something called an orbit. So to enable orbit, we simply turn up the speed and then set the width to an appropriate area within the original sample where we want to create our grains. Now if I click anywhere in the ruler and just drag to a reasonably central position, you'll see that the width span of that orbit will be equidistant from the center of the cursor. Now I'm going to set the orbit mode to random so that it randomizes positions for the play cursor within that orbit area. Now let's double the speed to make the randomization faster. Now the first thing I'm going to do is just head to the effects tab and just ensure that that reverb is up a little bit higher so we can hear it. So we've got some trail on that. Now to me that sounded a little bit too busy, and to hear what's going on, the best idea I think is to turn down the number of grains and increase the length of each grain so that it's a little bit more, it plays more of the original sound. And then perhaps change the wave shape for the grains just to get a little bit more of a glass-like sound. So I think this certainly sounds better. But let's try bolstering that with the oscillator. So we'll start with a sine wave where the shape is fully down, and we'll start about 50%. And now we'll turn the shape knob and try a square and sawtooth waves. And now about a bit of pulse width. So at this point it's too loud in the mix, so let's turn it down a bit. So at this point on a traditional synth, I'll be looking for a little bit more release time when I let go of the note, and we usually do that with an ADSR. Now in WaveCloud we use something called an FEG. It's an envelope shaper, and by default FEG1 is always assigned to the grains, but you can manipulate it in the mod matrix. But we can use these three buttons at the top of the FEG generator to go through some default setups. So fast, for instance, is a quick stab with no loop points. Default is just what we end up with when we init patch. And slow is what we really want, which is a slow attack and a slow release. Now I can touch and drag any of these breakpoints. In this case I've made the attack shorter, but I've got the overall shape of the wave I want. And now I'm just adjusting the length, the overall length of the envelope by just tapping and sliding my finger across that length, that envelope length. Now to me that sounds much better with a bit of a longer sustain on the end. Now you can double tap anywhere on these nodes to add additional nodes, and we can adjust the loop point so that when I press a key you'll see that it loops between that start and end loop point. But since that is not the sound we're going for, I'm just going to double tap on one of these points to remove it. So just double tap, and now I need to adjust the loop, and let's just line that up a little bit. Perfect, that'll do. Now another way of adding movement is to start with adding some filtering to that sound. So I'm going to click the VCF tab and initially listen to the original sound. Let's turn VCF 1 to low pass filter. I'm going to relatively adjust that till I get a nice high point which we can apply a sweep to later. Now we can also try adding a high pass filter on VCF2 and see what that sounds like. When we have 2 active, you can choose the mode of operation, either parallel or series. Now as I adjusted that low pass filter manually, it was a very pleasing sound. So what I want to do is try and automate that using an LFO, or a low frequency oscillator. Now to do that we need to switch to the LFO tab. Now WaveCloud has 2 LFOs, LFO1 and LFO2, and they're morphing oscillators. So by adjusting the shape of each LFO, we can morph between various waves. We also have the ability to skew those waves, double tap to reset. We can warp the waves, and we can also adjust the phase of the wave, or in other words an horizontal phase offset at which that LFO starts. Now initially the LFO speed is measured in kilohertz, but you can always turn on the sync and adjust this in actual beats or fractions of a beat. But because I want a slow sweep, I'm going to stay in kilohertz and put it at its lowest setting. And I also want just a traditional sine wave type envelope. And for this I'm also going to turn on the bipolar, which ensures the LFO generates values between 0 and 1 rather than -1 to +1. Now the LFO needs routing, otherwise it makes no effect on the sound we're producing. And we do that using something called the mod matrix. Now this might look intimidating at first sight, but it really isn't. Each vertical column represents a source of modulation, and each vertical row represents whatever it is you want to modulate. Now since I want LFO1 that we've just set up to modulate the cutoff frequency of VCF1, we tap and hold in the corresponding column and just drag either left or right to add positive and negative values. And this will add or subtract from the current setting. And since I set a relatively high cutoff frequency, I'm going to subtract from that cutoff frequency. Now I think that sweep could be a little bit bigger, so I'm going to move that down to -25. Now we can switch back to the VCF tab and just reduce that cutoff frequency a little. Okay, I think we've got a nice sweep there, and this is a good point at which I think to save the preset or our progress so far. And to do that, we press on the preset button to open up the preset manager. Now as you can see, the user bank is selected in the left here, so I'm going to tap on create group and just create a category for us to save our files within. And I'm going to hit the save button and give our preset a name and then press save. So there we are, we've created our first preset. We've recorded a file. We've used the orbiter to actually add some movement to that sound. We added an FEG to give the sound a bit of release. We added both low and high pass filters using the VCF tab. And finally we set up an LFO to modulate the cutoff frequency of VCF1. Now at this point I want to take a look at the WaveGlide, which is an alternative to using Orbit, and it's another way of adding movement to your grain file, and it's quite unique in the way it works. So you've seen earlier in this video me press the file button and load samples from the audio pool, but if we long press the file button, it'll open up the audio pool management dialog, and from here we're able to create files and folders, but we're also able to preview samples. So the idea here is I'm going to append several samples within the editor, and we can preview a sample by simply clicking it once and then clicking it again to preview. So I really like this tribal pad sound, so if we highlight the tribal pad sound and press load, it will load that file into the editor. Now if I scroll the editor and position my cursor at the end of that file, I can now look around and find another sample that I like to append at that cursor position. So to append that male choir, I just hit the insert button and it gets appended to the editor. Now I'm going to look for a third sound. Okay, so let's append that vocal sound to the end there. Now, looking at it, I can immediately see a problem. That third sound we added is not the same velocity or volume as the other two. So let's preview the difference. Now to fix this, the first thing to do is bring up the edit toolbar and position the toolbar out of the way. And then range the selection that we want to affect. Now normally you'd use a normalize tool, but because this is a selection we want to do, we can do it with something called pinch to zoom, where we just select an area and then with two fingers pinch apart, and we can actually inflate the volume of that particular selection. So I think they're a little bit more comparable now. So let's have a look at this WaveGlide. And the idea behind this is you can hear the transition as I slide across that first wave. And I want to capture that in a sequence. Now simply find a point of interest and press the add button to add an event to the chain. Now on second thoughts, I don't really want to chain two vocal sounds end on end, so let's try looking at the tribal pad. And since this tribal pad sample has a nice evolving flow, I'm going to add a couple of points within that particular sample. and we'll have the fourth point within the second vocal type sound. Now if we press the enable button, you'll see the markers appear within the waveform itself. And tapping on each of the 4 markers moves the cursor position to that location that we recorded. Now let's press a key on the keyboard and just see what happens and observe the default settings. So as you can see, it morphed through those segments one at a time, fading from one point to another. Now if we ensure loop is enabled, then instead of stopping when it hits segment 4, it will cycle back round to segment 1 again. Now I'm not happy about having a simple fade between segments 2 and 3 because there's a nice lot of evolving sounds going on there. So I'm going to click on segment 2 and then I'm going to change the transition type from fade to glide. And I'm going to reduce the hold time for that segment right down to practically nothing. And then extend how long that transition is. Because right now it's quite short and we want it to be a little bit longer, a little bit more evolving. So let's give 3 seconds a go. So if we add additional notes, play additional notes, you'll see that there'll be multiple of these sequences going off at the same time. Now all the measurements of time are in seconds currently, but we can change the sync mode from seconds to beats, and we can time everything over a number of beats, which is probably preferable in some cases. Now we can also do automation simultaneously using the mod matrix, but what we cannot do is have the WaveGlide and the orbits going at the same time. So if I move back to orbits and try and enable the orbit, you'll see that we've still got the WaveGlide markers there. Only when we turn off WaveGlide can we then adjust the orbit. So, but again, you can use the mod matrix to do modulation alongside one of these two modes. Now I want to conclude this video by showing you a few hints and tips and hidden features. And you'll notice throughout the interface many of the buttons have a chevron in the upper left corner, such as the menu button or the preset button or the file button. And as many of you know, that this means that there's a long press associated with that button. And on the menu, if we long press, we get to change the color scheme, for instance, and the knob types and so on. So if we long press on the preset button, we get to be able to search presets. If I want to look for pads, I can do that. And obviously the file button we touched earlier, if you long press the file button, we get the audio pool manager. Now this is used to organize files and create folders for files, and you can even drag and drop files into folders and stuff like that. So it's a very useful tool for organizing what appears in the file menu. Now for those of you that don't like drag and drop, you can hit this button next to the file button, and that allows you to import directly by selecting a file in the iPad file browser. And if you long press this button, we can remove the audio file from the editor. Now if you're getting a little bit too loud, playing too many notes at once, you can use this last button to turn on the limiter, and we can long press it to set the limiter threshold. So a very handy little tool there. Now let's close the keyboard, and we can get a closer look at this button above the meter. Now if I press that button, we get an overview appear, above the editor, and if I zoom in we can see that it actually gives us an idea of where we are within the file and the zoom level and everything. And if I grab the little box in the overview, I can drag it around to navigate the file. Press it again to turn off, long press it, and we actually zoom the contents of the editor to fit the display. Now the button below the meter is the play button, but if we long press the play button, it homes the cursor, and simply pressing the button plays back from the current cursor position. Now below the play button is the record button which we used earlier, but if we long press that record button, we get a choice of either manual start and stop or automated start and stop, so that's up to you. And below that we have the edit toolbar. Now if the edit toolbar is up, we can long press and we can actually pick on how to snap. So this is in relation to the ruler. So if I click on the ruler now, we're snapping to quarter notes, which is quite useful when you're measuring stuff in beats. So that brings us to the end of today's video. Lots more masterclasses to come. Don't forget to thumb up the video and subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you next time.